To step through the gates of a noble's garden in the 17th century was to leave behind one world and enter another. Outside the walls lay the noise of carts on cobblestones, the shouts of tradesmen, and the endless duties of the household. Inside, all was ordered calm. The garden was a space designed not only for beauty, but for peace, a place where time seemed to slow and life unfolded at a gentler rhythm. Imagine the gates themselves, often wrought of iron, their patterns curling into graceful shapes, or made of strong oak set between stone pillars. Passing through them, a visitor might feel as though they had crossed into a different realm. Gravel paths stretched ahead, bordered by low hedges, their lines straight and carefully measured. Trees stood at intervals, their branches trained to grow evenly, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The first sight was not of wild nature, but of nature tamed into harmony. The air within the gates carried its own character. It was filled with scents, roses opening in the sun, lavender growing thick along the borders, herbs releasing fragrance when brushed by a passing sleeve. The sound of a fountain often reached the ear before the eye found it, water falling in a steady rhythm, soft and musical. Birds perched in the branches, their songs mingling with the murmur of water, as though the garden itself were alive with quiet voices. For nobles, these gardens were not mere decoration. They were statements of taste, wealth, and refinement. To build one required careful planning, skilled gardeners, and patience. For hedges needed years to grow, fountains demanded engineering, and paths took time to lay. To possess such a space was to declare one's standing in society. Yet beyond their symbolic value, gardens also offered simple human comfort, a retreat from stone halls and crowded rooms, a place where one could walk at ease, breathe freely, and think without interruption. What might a noble do upon entering the garden at dawn? Perhaps they walked slowly down the central path, listening to the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Perhaps they paused to admire how the morning light struck the fountain, scattering droplets like silver in the air. A noble lady might bend to pick a rose, its petals soft against her fingers, while her companion admired the neat rows of tulips blooming in springtime order. Each detail invited the eye to linger. Each scent and sound invited the mind to rest. Even the design of the gates themselves reminded visitors of transition. To enter a noble's garden was to step away from the concerns of the world outside. Letters, disputes, and responsibilities remained behind the walls. Within, one walked among order, symmetry, and calm, a small reflection of the harmony nobles wished for in life itself. So when we picture the gardens of the 17th century, let us first imagine the gates. They were the threshold between two worlds, marking the beginning of a journey not measured in miles, but in moments. Beyond them lay the paths, the fountains, the flowers, and the quiet heart of the estate. But it all began with the act of passing. Through the slow swing of the gate, the first crunch of gravel, and the gentle realization that within these walls the noble found peace. Once through the garden gates, the first thing a noble would notice was the order of the paths. They were not simple tracks of dirt, worn down by countless footsteps, but carefully laid routes designed to guide the eye and the body with equal grace. Each walkway had its own character, some straight and commanding, others curving gently, as though inviting discovery. The most formal gardens favored long, straight avenues. These paths stretched from one end of the garden to the other, often lined with tall hedges or rows of trees. Walking down such an avenue gave a sense of purpose, for it drew the eye forward toward a fountain, a statue, or a distant pavilion. Nobles strolling here felt the same sense of order that the garden itself embodied, a world in which every detail was placed with care. Yet not every path was so direct. Many turned and curved, slipping behind tall hedges to create a sense of mystery. A visitor might follow one around a bend and find themselves in a shaded grove, or before a hidden bench, or gazing upon a pool they had not expected to see. The garden was both planned and playful, balancing order with surprise, always offering something new to those who walked its ways. What did it feel like to walk such paths? The surface was most often gravel, spread evenly, so that each step made a soft, steady crunch. The sound became part of the rhythm of the walk, unhurried and grounding. The air was filled with scents, for herbs such as thyme or mint were sometimes planted close to the borders, releasing fragrance as a hand brushed past. To stroll was not only to move through space, but to experience sound, scent, and sight together. Nobles walked these paths in many moods. Alone, a man or woman might wander slowly, pausing to admire the shape of a trimmed hedge or the reflection of a fountain. In company, the paths became places of conversation, two companions walking side by side, speaking in low voices, their words soft by the calm of their surroundings. Sometimes the paths hosted larger groups, nobles showing their gardens to guests, pointing out rare flowers or sharing stories of how the design had come to be. The paths were also practical. Servants used them to carry refreshments, books, or stools to shaded spots. Gardeners walked them daily, clipping, sweeping, and ensuring that nothing disturbed the ordered calm. Even in their labor, the garden remained serene, for the paths absorbed the footfalls and spread the sound of work into the larger harmony of the place. Benches were set at intervals along the walkways. A noble might sit for a moment, listening to the distant murmur of water or watching sunlight play through the leaves above. The garden was not made to be rushed through. Each path encouraged pausing, turning, lingering. To walk here was to be reminded that time itself could move more, gently, measured not by bells or duties, but by the simple sound of footsteps on gravel. So when we picture the noble gardens of the 17th century, let us see more than flowers and fountains. Let us see the paths that carried nobles through them, long avenues drawing the eye to grandeur, gentle curves inviting quiet discovery, every stone and step arranged with patience. The walkways themselves were journeys, small but meaningful, leading not only across the garden but deeper into a sense of calm. No sound brought calm to a noble's garden in the 17th century, quite like the murmur of water, where paths led the eye forward, fountains drew the ear. Their steady trickle, gentle splash, or rhythmic fall filled the air with a music that never tired, a sound both lively and soothing, as if the garden itself breathed in harmony with the day. At the center of many gardens stood a grand fountain, often placed where several paths met. Water rose from sculpted basins, sometimes arcing high before falling back in silver threads, sometimes bubbling gently over carved stone. Around it, benches were set for visitors to sit and listen, for the fountain was not only a decoration but a gathering place, a heart of motion in the midst of calm. Some fountains were adorned with statues. Stone figures of nymphs, lions, or mythic creatures poured water from urns or mouths. Nobles admired these designs not only for their artistry, but for the way they seemed to merge stone and water into one, a balance of strength and fluidity. The reflection of sunlight on moving water gave even cold stone a sense of life. Yet not all water features were grand. Many gardens had small pools or channels where fish swam lazily and lily floated on still surfaces. Nobles strolled along, their edges watching the ripples spread when a leaf fell or when a finger dipped into the coolness. These quiet waters balanced the livelier fountains, giving both energy and stillness to the garden. What did water mean to the nobles who walked? Here, it was a symbol of wealth, for to keep a fountain flowing required skillful engineering, pipes laid beneath the ground, and constant care. But beyond wealth, water represented life itself. In summer heat, the freshness of a fountain cooled the air. In the silence of evening, its sound carried gently, lulling the mind into rest. For a noble weary of courtly affairs, to sit by water was to let cares dissolve with each falling drop. Servants sometimes carried chairs or cushions to these spots, so their masters might linger for hours. Some read books here, others wrote letters, but many simply listened, letting the water's rhythm fill their thoughts. A conversation spoken near a fountain seemed softer, its words mingling with the steady splash. Even laughter felt gentler here, carried upward with the spray before dissolving into the air. At night, lanterns were sometimes hung near fountains. Their flames reflected on the moving surface. The water glimmered with golden light, as though stars themselves had descended into the basin. For nobles who wandered through their gardens under the moon, the fountains became companions, silent, constant, whispering in the darkness. So when we picture noble gardens in the 17th century, we must imagine the presence of water. It was more than ornament. It was music, movement, and calm. Each fountain and pool transformed the garden into a place not only of sight, but of sound and sensation. To stand beside one was to feel both refreshed and stilled, as if the world itself had paused to listen. If fountains brought sound and movement to a noble's garden, flowers brought color and fragrance. In the 17th century, these were not wild blooms scattered by chance, but carefully chosen plants arranged in patterns, beds, and borders. Petals offered beauty to the eye, their scents to the air, their very presence a reminder that nature, when guided with patience, could be as orderly as any hall or chamber. Imagine walking along a path bordered by roses. Their blossoms, heavy with color, leaned outward toward the sun. Some were pale and delicate, others deep red, their fragrance carried on the breeze. To pause here was to step into a soft world of scent, where even the smallest movement, a bee hovering, a hand brushing a petal, added to the gentle harmony. Lavender, too, was common in these gardens, its long stems nodding in rows, filling the air with a fragrance both sharp and calming. A noble walking past might reach down and rub a sprig between fingers, releasing more of its scent. In summer, whole borders seemed to hum with bees drawn to the purple flowers, their steady work adding life to the stillness of the garden. Tulips, rare and prized in this century, were sometimes planted in neat rows, their shapes simple yet striking. To see them in bloom was to admire both the colors of nature and the wealth of the owner. for such flowers were costly and much desired. Yet beyond their status they carried a quiet joy, their bright forms lifting the eye and lightening the heart of any who passed. Herbs and smaller flowers were planted close to walkways, so their scents would rise when brushed by a passing cloak. Thyme, mint, and rosemary added freshness to the air, while violets and primroses sprinkled softness along the edges of larger beds. The garden was as much a place of fragrance as of sight, each step bringing a new scent, blending into a tapestry of the senses. The seasons shaped this display. Spring filled the garden with blossoms, each one a promise of warmer days. Summer carried richness, roses heavy with bloom, lavender thick with color, lily opening beside pools. Autumn soft the tones, with marigolds and late roses lingering in the cooling air. Even winter, though bare, offered its own calm, the fragrance gone, but the memory of it lingering in the quiet spaces. Nobles often took delight in walking slowly among these beds, bending to admire a flower more closely, or gathering a small bundle to carry indoors. Ladies of the household sometimes arranged blossoms in vases for tables and chambers, while men admired the order of beds shaped into circles, squares, or long straight lines. To cultivate such beauty was not only to enjoy it, but to show the harmony of human care joined with nature's gifts. And so, when we think of the noble gardens of the 17th century, we must not forget the flowers. They were more than decoration. They were fragrance, color, and life itself, woven into the design of paths and borders. To walk among them was to walk in a world of softness, where the senses were filled with gentle pleasure, and the mind, for a time, could find peace. Flowers gave color, and fountains gave sound, but trees gave structure to a noble's garden in the 17th century. Their branches arched overhead, their trunks lined paths, and their shade offered cool relief on warm summer days. To walk among them was to feel both sheltered and guided, as though the garden itself had drawn a curtain against the heat of the world. Some trees were planted in long, straight avenues. Their branches grew in disciplined rows, trimmed and trained so that they seemed almost architectural. To walk beneath them was like walking through a green hall, the canopy above filtering the sunlight into patterns that shifted gently as the leaves stirred in the breeze. Such avenues were among the most admired features of noble gardens, symbols of both order and calm. Other trees stood in small groves, where their shade gathered in deeper pools. Here the air was cooler, filled with the sound of rustling leaves and the occasional call of birds nesting high above. Nobles often paused in these places, seated on benches placed in the half-light, their conversations soft by the hush of the canopy. The grove was a retreat within a retreat, a place where one could linger without hurry. Fruit trees also found a place in many noble gardens. Apple and pear trees spread their blossoms in spring, filling the air with fragrance before, offering their fruit later in the year. Though orchards for harvest were usually kept apart from the formal gardens, a few trees were often planted within sight of walkways, their beauty as valued as their produce. Watching the cycle of blossom to fruit reminded nobles that even the most ordered spaces shared in nature's rhythm. The shade of trees became a companion to every walk. In the morning, sunlight slipped through their leaves in thin streams of gold. At midday, they offered protection from heat, their branches, catching the brightness and softening it. In the evening, the last light filtered gently through, casting long shadows that stretched across gravel paths and still pools. Each hour gave a different mood, and the trees marked it with quiet grace. What did it feel like to rest beneath them? Imagine sitting on a carved stone bench, the air cool around you, the leaves moving above in a constant murmur. The breeze carried the scent of earth and green wood, mingled with faint traces of flowers nearby. Time seemed slower, as though the shade itself encouraged patience. To close one's eyes here was to feel both hidden and comforted, as though wrapped in the calm of the garden. So when we picture noble gardens in the 17th century, we must see the trees as more than decoration. They were pillars of the design, givers of shade, companions to every step. Their strength framed the flowers, their calm anchored the fountains, and their shadows offered travelers a place to pause. To walk beneath them was to know the balance of sunlight and shade, and to feel the deep stillness only a garden's trees could give. Not every detail in a noble's garden was made of flowers or trees. There were also ornaments and designs carefully placed to guide the eye and to add variety to the paths. These touches, though quieter than fountains or blossoms, gave the garden a sense of refinement, showing that every part had been shaped with intention. Urns were among the most common. Made of stone or terracotta, they were set upon pedestals or placed at the corners of walkways. Some were simple, their shapes smooth and rounded. Others were carved with patterns of leaves or fruit. They were not meant to hold plants, but to stand as decorative accents, adding form where nature provided color. Trellises offered another kind of ornament. These wooden frames, sometimes built into arches, supported climbing plants such as roses or vines. In summer, they became living walls of green and bloom, creating shaded passageways where nobles could walk in cool comfort. A trellis heavy with blossoms was a favorite place for rest, its scent drifting down as petals fell softly onto the gravel below. Hedges themselves were sometimes shaped into patterns. Gardeners clipped them with great care, forming straight lines, rounded corners, or even intricate knots that could be admired from above. This artistry turned greenery into design, showing the patience and discipline that noble gardens were known for. Walking beside such hedges was like walking past. Living architecture, softened by leaves, yet precise in form. Ornaments also included sundials, placed upon pedestals in open lawns. These devices, simple yet elegant, marked the passage of hours with the shadow of a metal arm. They reminded visitors that even in the calm of the garden, time continued to move, though at a pace gentler than within the walls of the house. A noble might pause here, watching the shadow inch across the dial, the moment blending reflection with the quiet turning of the day. What did these ornaments mean to those who strolled among them? They were not grand displays, but subtle touches, signs that beauty was found not only in blossoms or flowing water, but also in form, shape, and order. They gave the eye places to rest, framed the garden's design, and reminded the visitor that this was a place where thought and care had shaped every detail. So when we picture noble gardens in the 17th century, let us imagine not statues, but ornaments and designs that spoke with quieter voices. Urns at the turning of paths, trellises heavy with roses, hedges trimmed into patterns, and sundials, marking the slow movement of the sun. These were the companions of the walk, blending with flowers and trees to create a harmony of nature and craft. A garden was not only for walking, it was also for pausing, for sitting still, and for letting the surroundings speak quietly to the senses. In the 17th century, nobles understood this well, and so their gardens were dotted with benches and resting places, small sanctuaries within the larger sanctuary, inviting moments of stillness. These benches took many forms. Some were carved from stone, cool to the touch, even on a summer day. Others were made of wood, smoothed by the hands and clothes of countless visitors who had sat there before. A few were set beneath trellises, vines trained overhead to create living shade. Wherever they stood, their purpose was the same, to offer rest, reflection, and an unhurried view of the garden's calm order. Imagine walking along a gravel path until you come to a bench beside a fountain. You sit, and the sound of your footsteps is replaced by the gentle splash of falling water. Around you, roses lean in the breeze, their fragrance drifting lightly. Above, a bird calls from a tree, its song mingling with the fountain's steady rhythm. The bench is no longer just a seat. It is a pause, a frame for the moment, reminding you that the garden is not only to be moved through, but to be lived in. Some resting places were designed for solitude. A narrow seat tucked into an alcove of hedges gave privacy, a corner where one could think or simply breathe. Others were more open, placed along avenues so that several nobles might sit together, speaking quietly as they watched the play of light across the lawn. Each setting matched its mood, some for reflection, some for companionship, all for calm. Benches were often placed with care to capture views. One might face a long avenue, the perspective stretching away into distance. Another might sit by a pool, where reflections of sky and stone shifted with each ripple. Yet another might be positioned beneath trees, the canopy above weaving patterns of light and shade. In this way, the bench was more than furniture. It was a guide showing where the garden wished you to linger, what it wished you to see. Nobles often lingered here for hours. Some read books, their eyes lifting now and again to rest on the horizon. Others listened to music played by small ensembles during gatherings, the sound carrying softly across lawns. Many simply sat in silence, the garden filling their senses until their minds too felt ordered and at peace. Even servants and gardeners sometimes used these resting places when work was done, sitting quietly to enjoy the very spaces they had shaped. Though the benches belonged to the noble household, the calm they offered was universal, felt by all who paused upon them. So when we picture noble gardens of the 17th century, we must see not only the walkways, fountains, flowers, and trees, but also the benches waiting in their shade. They were symbols of stillness, invitations to rest, and companions to reflection. For in the end, the true gift of the garden was not only in its beauty, but in the peace it gave to those who sat within it. Though gardens invited solitude, they were just as often places for companionship. In the 17th century, nobles did not always walk their grounds alone. They strolled side by side with friends, family, or guests, speaking softly as their footsteps mingled with the crunch of gravel and the murmur of fountains. The garden became not only a retreat for the mind, but also a stage for gentle conversation. Imagine two nobles walking slowly down a shaded avenue, their cloaks brushing the trimmed hedges. Their voices are low, steady, unhurried, the sort of speech that unfolds naturally when the surroundings themselves encourage patience. They pause now and again to admire a rose in bloom or to point toward a distant statue. Words come easily, carried at the pace of the walk, never hurried, never sharp. The garden offered privacy without isolation. A conversation held along a quiet path felt safe, softened by the air and the open sky. Secrets could be shared here as easily as laughter. Letters and documents had their place inside halls and chambers, but the garden gave words a gentler setting, one where ideas felt freer, less bound by duty. Benches, too, served this purpose. 2 or 3 companions might sit together by a pool, speaking while fish drifted below the surface. Others gathered beside a fountain, their voices blending with the water's music, so that only those nearest could hear. A noble lady might speak with her children here, pointing out the names of flowers. A host might guide a guest to a seat beneath an arbor, offering the calm of the garden as a gift of welcome. There were also moments of lighter company. Groups of visitors sometimes wandered together, their laughter echoing softly between hedges. Musicians might be invited to play beneath the trees, while nobles sat nearby, their conversations flowing with the notes of lute or viol. Even these livelier gatherings remained shaped by the garden's calm, nothing shouted, nothing rushed, all softened by the setting. What made garden conversations special was not only the company, but the way the space shaped them. Indoors, voices carried against stone walls. In courts, words were surrounded by formality. But here, among flowers and shade, conversation felt easier. The mind wandered with the path, the words lingered like fragrance on the air, and silence was as welcome as speech. So when we picture noble gardens of the 17th century, let us imagine not only individuals in solitude, but companions walking side by side, friends pausing on benches, families gathered beneath trees, visitors speaking softly beside fountains. The garden was more than a display of beauty. It was a place where words could drift as gently as petals in the breeze, and where conversation itself became part of the calm harmony of the day. A noble's garden in the 17th century was never the same from month to month, though the paths, fountains, and statues remained unchanged. The seasons turned the garden into many worlds within one. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter each carried their own character, giving nobles new reasons to walk, linger, and admire. Spring was a time of awakening. Blossoms appeared on fruit trees, their petals scattering across the gravel paths like pale snow. Tulips, violets, and primroses filled beds with fresh color, their brightness a promise after the quiet of winter. Nobles walked slowly through the grounds, pausing to notice each new bloom, each scent that rose on the warming breeze. Birds returned to the trees, their songs mixing with the murmur of fountains. The whole garden seemed alive with beginnings. Summer brought richness. Roses opened in full bloom, their fragrance thick in the air. Lavender swayed in purple rose, bees moving tirelessly among the flowers. The shade of trees became more precious, offering coolness beneath their broad leaves. Nobles often lingered here in the warm evenings, seated by pools that reflected the last light of day. Conversations stretched long into twilight, softened by the steady hum of insects and the glow of lanterns hung near fountains. Autumn carried a softer beauty. Colors deepened into gold, crimson, and brown, fruit ripened on trees, and gardeners gathered the last of the season's bounty. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, earthy and calm. Nobles walking in autumn gardens felt the passing of the year in every step, a gentle reminder that all things moved in cycles, that beauty shifted but did not vanish. The quiet of autumn walks was a quiet of reflection. Winter stripped the garden to its bones. Leaves fell, flowers faded, and branches stood bare against the pale sky. Yet even then, the garden held its own calm. Paths lay clean and silent. Frost glimmered on hedges, and statues stood out in sharp relief against the muted world. Nobles still wandered here, cloaks wrapped tightly, their breath clouding in the cold air. What was once fragrance and color became stillness and form, a reminder that beauty did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Through all seasons, the garden remained a place of retreat. It shifted in mood and dress, but it never ceased to offer peace. Nobles who walked it in spring, summer, autumn, and winter found not sameness but renewal, each visit different, each season bringing its own gift. The garden was alive in time as well as in space, and its rhythm matched the rhythm of life itself. So when we think of noble gardens in the 17th century, let us not imagine them fixed in a single moment of bloom. Let us picture them across the whole year. Blossoms in spring, richness in summer, gold in autumn, stillness in winter. For it was this endless turning that made the garden not only a place of beauty, but a faithful companion through the changing seasons. For nobles in the 17th century, the garden was more than a display of wealth or artistry. It was, above all, a retreat. Within its walls, life moved at a gentler pace. The duties of the household, the concerns of court, the noise of towns, all remained outside. Inside, time unfolded quietly, shaped not by bells or obligations, but by the simple rhythm of footsteps, fountains, and seasons. To walk the paths was to enter a world designed for calm. Straight avenues led the eye toward fountains and statues, while curving walkways invited discovery and surprise. Every turn offered a new view, a new detail to rest the gaze upon. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the scent of lavender, the glimmer of water, each sense was touched in soft harmony. Flowers gave fragrance and color, trees gave shade and shelter, and benches gave places for pause. Statues stood as companions, their silent presence reminding visitors of continuity in a world of change. Water whispered at the heart of it all, steady and soothing, its sound blending with the rustle of leaves and the songs of birds. The garden welcomed both solitude and company. A noble might walk alone in reflection, finding peace in silence, or they might stroll with companions, their words softened by the setting, their laughter mingling with the garden's calm. Families gathered beneath the trees, guests were welcomed with gentle hospitality, and even music was sometimes played to fill the air with tones as light as the petals that drifted on the breeze. Across the seasons, the garden changed, yet remained constant. Spring's blossoms, summer's richness, autumn's gold, winter's stillness, each gave its own mood, yet all reminded visitors that beauty existed in every part of the year. The garden was never finished, never truly still. It was alive, breathing with the rhythm of nature, reflecting the patience of those who tended it. And so when we think of noble gardens in the 17th century, we must see them not only as places of grandeur, but as places of rest. They were retreats for the mind as much as the body, spaces where order and nature were joined in harmony. To step inside was to find balance between stone and leaf, silence and song, solitude and companionship. For the nobles who walked their gardens, this balance was a gift. It was a reminder that beyond duties and displays, life also required moments of stillness, times when the world could be set aside, and peace could be found in the simple act of being among flowers, trees, and water. The garden gave them that gift, and in its calm embrace, time itself seemed kinder.